This clip is dedicated to the so-called Scandinavian way of life. From the 1960s, when the Scandinavian social states were constructed, and to the 1990s, it was very popular to praise the Scandinavian model, Scandinavian way of life. Uh, for instance, Scandinavian so-called humble type of life. For instance, the Scandinavians, they don't tend to spend so much energy for their homes and apartments like the Americans do, for instance, and this is why the American right wingers usually hate Scandinavia, and first and foremost they hate Sweden, and they hate Sweden because the Sweden is the most leftist, the most modernistic of those. And the American writers like Ann Coulter, for instance, they criticize Scandinavia, that their way of life is mediocre. It's not humble, it's not wise, it's just mediocre and dull and stupid, and so on. So okay, difference of opinion. And there is also a huge difference of opinion within Scandinavia. It's very tempting to think about Scandinavia. It would be, including Greenland, it would be a biggest European state, even bigger than the European Russia, the European part of Russia, because the both of Norway and Sweden, and also Finland, and also Denmark is a small country, but those three are very big countries for Europe. So you would have a very big country, especially including Greenland, which belongs to Denmark, and there would be slightly less than 30 million of rich inhabitants. So it would be a real superpower. Superpower, but a considerable power. But it's not impossible, although they have common airlines, national airlines. They have many common things, but they are it's very doubt. I doubt very much if they can be united one day, because, for instance, the Denmark is far more Sweden. Norway also, and Norway also benefits largely from their huge oil reserves, which the other Scandinavian countries have not. So Denmark is more liberal oriented, more free market economy oriented, and both Norway, which up to the 19th century was a part of Denmark. Norway and Denmark are part of NATO from the beginning, and they are very actively taking part in all these NATO arrangements in the world, in the interventions in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Also fight Somali pirates and so on. So very actively participating in the global politics, and also military politics, military cooperation within NATO, and also with other countries. Sweden is nothing of the kind. Sweden is all is about peace, all is about pacifism, and very neutrality. Swedes in Finland, but and of course this government collapsed and was replaced with other, and the discussion stopped, and the fear of Putin and Russia's politics also is lower than it used to be several years ago. So so we see that Finland and then Sweden, they are not part or not members of NATO. So we have a huge division here. And also the business culture is different. For instance, and it manifested itself very strongly when the huge bridge across the from Malmö to Copenhagen was constructed. Because since in the 1990 the Swedish economy collapsed because the taxes were too high, and the competition with the South Korea and all these other new economics, the Asian tigers, was doing so very bad, that the prices also went low, and so you can earn more in Denmark. And many Swedes do that. They go to Denmark for work, but they go back to their homes in Malmö after work because of the bridge that makes it possible to do it very quickly. And those business cultures, they are very different, because the Danes are usually perceived as the Arabs of the North. They're very hierarchical. They like the hierarchy, and they usually have that everything done like the boss tells the coworker what to do. The coworker does it, but in the way the coworker chooses to do. The Swedes, they usually have the huge gathering, and everyone is welcome to give opinion, to state an opinion, even those who are not directly connected to the task. What's settled on the gathering? This is precisely what the coworker has to do afterwards. So two totally different approaches. Finland is tend to be more nationalistic and free market oriented than Sweden, so also a huge division, and it's not Germanic mostly. There's a Swedish minority, but the four-fifths of the Finnish population is not Germanic. So different culture altogether. So as you see, there is nothing like Scandinavian model. There are many models. When the immigrants came, the Danes have warned that they will not accept any immigrants, and they published it in the very well-read newspaper in Beirut. This is the only European country that's the only Scandinavian and the only European country that did it. And the Swedes did nothing of the kind. They accepted a huge number of immigrants and refugees and immigrants, and they were helping them with everything, and they were even too good for them. And the Danes were accepted only a small portion, and they were rather harsh with them, and they were criticized for it by the Swedes. So the Swedes were thinking that Danes are basically fascists in their approach towards immigrants and refugees, and the Danes were replying with other nicknames like communists, Swedish communists, and so on. So as we see, totally different approach, totally different 4 or maybe 5 culture, because we can also we must not forget about the rock. Which is basically inhabitable, but it's still inhabited by the population, which is as big as the population of Venice. I mean, of course, Iceland. So it's 4 or maybe 5 cultures altogether. Not one Scandinavian way of life, not one Scandinavian culture, to be sure.